Greetings gamers, ex-gamers and friends and family members of gamers. It's day 5 of Game Free January and I have to say I'm still waiting for those nasty withdrawal symptoms to kick in. Again, in a spirit of full disclosure, I did have a late start this morning, but I'm going to put this down to the disturbed sleep I had yesterday. I'm getting fed up of keep saying nothing to report. This experiment's looking like one massive told you I'm not an addict. Still, could be worse. I actually could be an addict. I've actually gone several days without gaming in the past, so maybe I'm just in a gaming lull where my decision to stop gaming for a month coincided with my period of life where I wouldn't have normally been gaming anyway, maybe. That being said, I just got Subnautica and I was really enjoying the game at the time I stopped playing. Still, one thing is for sure, in the last 1.5 decades, I've never been a whole month without gaming. So if I make it through January withdrawal symptom free, I'll have very strong reason to believe that I play the games, they don't play me. Yesterday I talked about video game addiction as a small part of a much larger problem that is symptomatic of a deeply unhappy society where almost everybody has some sort of a problem, whether it is over or under eating, substance abuse or behavioural addiction. Today, I'd like to look closer at what's going on in the brain of an addict from a neurological perspective. We sometimes think of the brain as a giant computer controlling a robotic body with the nerves acting like wires connecting the muscle motors to the controlling circuitry of the brain. And that analogy is useful up to a point, but the tiny voltages involved in the electrical impulses that travel down the nerves isn't sufficient to push a current all the way from the brain to the toes. This means some kind of signal amplification is going on. A nerve cell has two ends. One end is called a dendrite, after the Greek word for tree, due to its branching tree-like structure. The long thin body of the nerve is called the axon, from the Greek word for axis. The axon terminates at the synaptic gap. At the axon terminal, the cell contains vesicles which contain chemicals known as neurotransmitters. When an electrical impulse travels down the nerve from the dendrite to the axon terminal, a vesicle moves to the edge of the nerve and releases its content into the synaptic gap. Attached to the end of the dendrite are receptors that fire an electrical impulse if a neurotransmitter binds to the receptor. In this way, the electrical signal is amplified, so signal loss is not felt, and the brain can control muscles even as far away as the toes. The story doesn't end there, however. The body needs to mop up the excess neurotransmitters. Some are destroyed, and others are reabsorbed for later use. When neurotransmitters are reabsorbed, we call this reuptake. You might have heard of a class of antidepressants called SSRIs. SSRI stands for Specific Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitor. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and as the name suggests, the drug works by preventing the reuptake of the neurotransmitter serotonin, thus increasing the level of neurotransmitters in the synaptic pathways. Some drugs cause the release of excess neurotransmitters, other drugs specifically mimic the effects of neurotransmitters, and other drugs prevent the reuptake of neurotransmitters, all of which have the same effect of causing an increase in signal strength. Now, if you listen to music that is too loud for too long, you will eventually go deaf. In the same way, if the brain is continuing to function at over 100% capacity due to an overload in neurotransmitters, then it will become damaged. Luckily, the brain is extremely adaptable, and if the brain is constantly assaulted with too many signals, it adapts. sometimes by reducing the number of vesicles, or reducing the number of receptors, or reducing the amount of neurotransmitters in a vesicle, so that the brain can function normally even when assaulted by the patient's drug of choice. Of course, when that drug of choice is withdrawn, the brain is now struggling to function due to reduced signal strength. This is why addicts suffer withdrawal symptoms until such time as the brain can adapt to the lower signal strength. Okay, but how does this relate to video game addiction, or for that matter gambling or any non-chemical behavioural addictions? Frankly, even the experts don't really understand the mechanism, but injecting, snorting, sniffing and popping aren't the only way to mess with your endocrine system. Some people say that thrill seekers are addicted to their own adrenaline. The reason addiction feels so good is because of increased activity in the region of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is responsible for, among other things, both pleasure and learning through positive reinforcement. Actually, it also plays a role in aversion and negative reinforcement. This is a very important part of the brain for decision making and is part of a primary survival mechanism. When we engage in behaviours that increase our chance of survival or increase our chances of reproduction, such as eating, drinking, escaping a predator, fighting and winning, hunting, a surge of neurotransmitters in the nucleus accumbens rewards the risks we took to improve our survival, so we are more inclined to take those risks again. When we leave our nice safe cave to go hunt or forage, the sound of a twig snapping could mean either we are going to get food or we are going to be food. A region of the brain called the amygdala that regulates emotional response, including fear, anxiety and aggression, becomes hyperactive. Our body is flooded with hormones like adrenaline and cortisone from the adrenal glands located just above the kidneys to decrease our sensitivity to pain and increase blood flow to the muscles. This is known as the fight or flight response. It's one of the most primal instincts almost all animals have. Our senses become hyper alert and nothing else matters except finding the source of that sound and gearing up for a life and death battle, during which the increased strength and speed and concentration that comes from the adrenaline would come in really handy, from which we will either be eaten, in which case that flood of pain-killing cortisone will come in very handy, or we will come out victorious with some meal to take back to the cave. Winning a life or death struggle in this way increases our chance of survival, so the nucleus accumbens is activated, providing us with pleasure and positively reinforces the behaviour pattern that leads us to bringing home the bacon. Without the release of pleasure from the nucleus accumbens, we will only know the fear, anxiety and aggression from the amygdala, making hunting and foraging an unpleasant experience that is unlikely to be repeated, thus decreasing our likelihood for survival. So when risks are taken and there is a successful outcome, we are flooded with pleasurable sensations that increase our likelihood of undertaking that risky behaviour. When a gambler puts down a wager, he or she is taking a risk, and if the outcome of that risk is favourable, the gambler gets a surge of neurotransmitters that activate the reward pathways in the nucleus accumbens, just as emerging from a life or death battle with food to keep the family alive for another day activates the same region of the brain. A gamer, of course, is immersed in a virtual world that often involves solving problems, hunting, fighting and competing, during which the senses are heightened and the brain is filtering out stray thoughts or worries or distractions to focus on the problem at hand. Reflexes are heightened and normal aches and pains and stiffness melt away in the natural painkillers released by the primary fight or flight mechanism designed to increase our chances of survival in a life or death struggle. If the gamer has a successful outcome in the game, the positive reinforcement signals in the nucleus accumbens floods the brain with a pleasurable sensation to encourage that behaviour to be repeated. In this way, behavioural addictions can function in much the same way as a drug addiction. Unfortunately, the rate at which the brain adapts to increased signal strength is much faster than the rate at which the brain adapts to reduced signal strength, and it can sometimes take years to recover. Supporting an addict out of his or her addiction for only a few days or weeks or even a month, and then expecting the addict to be fully recovered, puts the addict under increased pressure to relapse. Let's be under no pretense. An addicted brain is a damaged brain. Recovering from addiction is a slow, tortuous process like recovering from a stroke. Selfish, impatient, judgmental and insensitive comments like "man up" and "get over yourself" or "you brought this on yourself" do nothing to help the addict and are more likely to push the addict back into addiction. If you feel that you might have a problem with excessive gaming and are worried you might be developing an addiction, why not follow along or try out this simple test of going game-free for a month? Remember, it can be any month and you don't have to start on the 1st. Why not post a comment and let me know how you're doing, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. But as for me, big fat hairy 4 days and counting non-gamer, I look forward to seeing you in another video.